welcome back to Wish as we begin to read chapter 18. Okay, do you want to meet my mama dog, Lily? Hi, Lily. There's mama dog. Sorry again, I put blankets on my furniture because of my dogs. They'll mess up my good furniture, so sorry about that. Anyways, here's 18. So now you've met Lily and Lexi. 18. Me and Howard rode our bikes up and down that mountain road all morning long. We tromped through the woods, pushing our way around thick shrubs and stepping over prickly bushes. We went back to the creek behind Howard's house 3 times, calling and whistling. We peered under porches and open sheds and circled barns. By lunchtime, the blazing summer sun overhead left pockets of melted asphalt in the road and trickles of sweat down our backs. We didn't talk much, but that was fine by me. I'd gone over and over in my head how I'd say I'm sorry to Howard for what I said about his wish, but whenever I thought the time was right, my mouth went dry and my throat squeezed up, and the words I've planned to say stayed bottled up inside. If you notice, there's a star on some of the pages in this book, and that means you can make your own wish. So wish upon a star. Next page. We went back to Gus and Bertha's a few times to check the trap, but the table scraps were still there in the pie tin. We had lunch on Howard's front porch, sitting on the couch, eating Vienna sausages and cold pork and beans off paper plates on our laps. Dwight and Cotton were out in the yard throwing rocks at the mailbox. They hit the metal with a loud thwang and left little dents on the sides. Mrs. Odom came out and told them to stop, and then she sat on the couch and told me not to worry. She sure Wishbone would come back. You've got to think positive, she said. Yes, ma'am, I mumbled. Did she know I said that mean thing to Howard? If she knew, I bet she wouldn't want me on her team anymore. That afternoon, Burl drove us into town to search parking lots and dumpsters. Dwight and Lenny made some lost dog signs, and we nailed them to telephone poles and fence posts. It was almost supper time when me and Howard rode our bikes back to Gus and Bertha's and checked the trap one more time. Then we sat in lawn chairs out by the garden and watched dragonflies flit over the tops of marigolds. In my head, I said, Howard, I'm sorry I said that about your wish, about your up and down walk. Then I'd say, shoot, nobody even cares about your up and down walk. But then he'd know that was a big fat lie, because he saw those kids leaving him out of kickball games and cutting in line in front of him like he was invisible. So I sat there in silence with my thoughts spinning in my head. Maybe he didn't care about what I said. I mean, he was still being nice to me. He was helping me look for Wishbone. You sure do look forlorn, Howard said. I didn't know one other kid in the whole world who would use the word forlorn, but that was the perfect word to describe me, forlorn. Just before supper, Jackie called and told me she went to see Scrappy in jail and got a tattoo. Don't you even want to know what it is, she asked, when I didn't say anything. Sure. A bird, she said, a black bird in a cage, right on the back of his hand. Can you believe that? I guess. Then she rambled on about how graduating from high school wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, and how much she hated her job at the Waffle House. People leave the tables all nasty with syrup, she said, and they plop their crying babies in a high chair and expect me to bring their blueberry waffles in like a minute. She told me that her boyfriend Arlo wrecked his car and turned out to be a loser, and Carol Lee saw him at the mall with Darla Jacobs, she said. So I told him, adios, sucker, and then, aren't you going to ask me about Wishbone? I said, what? I've been telling her about Wishbone when she called, how smart he is and how he learned to sit and stay. And now he slept by my bed. Wishbone, I said, my dog. Aren't you even going to ask me about him? Oh, sure. She said, how's Wishbone? Gone, I hollered. He's gone. And then I spewed out the whole sorry story about how he'd run off and how I'd look everywhere, but I figured he'd rather be a stray than live with me. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. I moved on to how he didn't want me to be the same as nobody else wanted me, and how I hoped she was enjoying her perfect life while I was stuck here in Colby with a bunch of squirrel-eating hillbillies, and how I hung up and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. I could see Bertha in the kitchen stirring something on the stove and pretending like she hadn't heard me. When the phone rang again, I just looked at it there in my hand. Bertha stopped stirring. Ring, ring, ring. Hello, I said in a trembly voice. Charlie. Jackie's voice floated through the telephone line, soft and sure, from Riley to Colby. I pictured her voice traveling from Carol Lee's fancy brick house along highways and over treetops, and then up the winding road and down the gravel driveway into this little house perched on the side of the mountain, and finally getting to me, sitting on the floor and needing to hear it. Sorry about Wishbone, Jackie said. I really am. I hope he comes back. I watched a fly dart from the window screen to the lamp to the ceiling. Charlie, Jackie said. What? I know this whole situation has been hard on you. Situation? Is that what this was, a situation? I think Mama's getting better, Jackie said. I talked to her yesterday. She sounded better. What did that mean? That she got out of bed? That she got her feet on the ground? That she cared one bit about me? That I'd go back to Riley and our broken family would suddenly disappear in its place and would be a real family holding hands and saying the blessing? Maybe I could come visit you soon, Jackie went on. I'm going to get my driver's license in a couple of weeks. Did I tell you that? And Carol Lee got a car for graduation. Can you believe that? If I get some time off from my godforsaken job, I could come to Colby. We could go to Asheville and hang out. They have vegan restaurants there. Did you know that? I'm thinking about becoming a vegan. And I bet she jabbered on about all the things we can do, but she left out the part about how she could go back to her perfect life and I would still be here without my dog and wishing I hadn't been mean to Howard. That night when Gus got home, the three of us drove around looking for Wishbone. We went down to the school and over to the diner. We drove through the trailer parks and up alleys. While we drove, Bertha told us a story she'd read. Sorry about Lexi in the background making noises. Bertha told us a story she'd read in the newspaper about a dog that fell out of the back of the van in North Carolina and managed to find his way back to Indiana. Almost 400 miles, she said. The family had been on vacation over in Maggie Valley. I can't hardly believe that. Gus was quiet, shifting a toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other while he scanned the roadside and the parking lots and the woods as he drove. Every now and then, he said, "Don't worry, Butterbean, we'll find him." But I was thinking that maybe now was the time to change my wish. Maybe next time I got a chance, I should wish my dog would come back. Finally, it got too dark to see much anymore, so we headed home. We turned into the driveway, and that old car bounced and squeaked over the holes, the crunch of the tires and gravel echoing in the still evening air. headlights sent beams of light dancing through the mountain laurel and chokeberries beside the driveway. Finally, the house came into view, and I thought my heart was going to leap right out of me at what I saw. There was Wishbone wagging his tail as he trotted toward us, dragging his leash on the ground behind him. Chapter 19. Wishbone had liverwurst and scrambled eggs for dinner every night for a week. He learned to roll over and turn in circles and flip a dog biscuit off his nose and catch it. And he didn't sleep on the floor beside my bed anymore. He slept right in the bed with me. I didn't mind his liverwurst breath one bit. I loved his soft, warm fur and feel his heartbeat against my cheek when I hugged him. Every night after supper, when me and Gus and Bertha sat out on the porch, Wishbone snored contentedly while I rubbed my bare feet over his warm back. Sometimes he'd jump up and let out a bark at a noise down in the woods, at a raccoon or a possum, or maybe even just the rustle of leaves in the wind. You want to meet Daddy? There's Daddy Levi. Again, I apologize for all the blankets on my furniture for the dogs. So, that was one happy dog, Butterbean, Gus would say. Then Bertha would urge Gus to tell us another story about his dog Skeeter. How about the time he fell in the river when y'all were fishing and your brother jumped in after him and flipped the boat over? She said. Gus chuckled, but before he could say a word, Bertha said, "Oh, I know. Tell Charlie about the time your sister used to dress Skeeter up in her Girl Scout uniform. I took Wishbone to the Odom, almost every day. I still hadn't told Howard how I was sorry for what I said about his up and down walk, so there was always a big old elephant in the room for me. But Howard, he never let on that anything happened between us. Still, I felt mad at myself for not speaking up. I kept thinking about what Bertha had said about judging folks for how they fix their mistakes, and I knew I wasn't doing a very good job of fixing mine. Every time me and Wishbone showed up at the Odom's front door, one of them would say, "Hey," and wave us in, and I'd get caught in the flurry of that family like a tornado, spinning me off my feet. Me and Howard played Parcheesi at the kitchen table with a fan whirring in the doorway, while Wishbone scurried around searching for dropped crackers or spilt juice. Cotton would stick his face right up against the fan and let out a Tarzan yell, his voice coming out all quivery and making us laugh. Burl and Lenny would come in and make tomato sandwiches, leaving greasy black fingerprints on everything they touched. Seemed like they were always working on some kind of engine, car, motorcycle, lawnmower. Every once in a while, I swear wood would drift through the screen door from out in the yard, and Mrs. Odom would march out there and tell them to hush up talking like that. Dwight went to baseball camp at the YMCA and came home covered in red dirt and sweat. Most days, he and Cotton ended up some kind of wrestling match, throwing sofa cushions at each other until Cotton ended up whining to Mrs. Odom. Some days it was so hot, me and Howard would lay on the porch with ice cubes on our foreheads and tell knock-knock jokes. One day, Mr. Odom put a tarp in the bed of his pickup truck and filled it with water. We sat in there with our shorts and t-shirts on and ate frozen Kool-Aid in paper cups. I wish we could go to a real swimming pool, Howard said. When I go back to Riley, I said, I'm going to take swimming lessons like I did last summer. When are you going back to Riley? I shrugged. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying when I do. Maybe if you stay in Colby, Daddy will drive us over to the lake one day Howard said. We could take Wishbone. I bet he'd like to swim, maybe. Let's go down to the creek, Howard said. I sighed. He'd been trying to get me to go back down to the creek behind the house for days, but I was nervous. What if Wishbone runs off again? I said. Hold on to the leash real good, Howard said. But really, Charlie, he don't want to run off. He just made a mistake last time. He tossed a saltine cracker on the floor for Wishbone. He came back, didn't he? So I finally said yes, and the three of us trudged down the path to the creek with ferns tickling our legs and Wishbone sniffing at every little thing along the way. But when we got there, a bad, heavy feeling settled over me. Instead of seeing the tiny silver minnows darting around the mossy rocks, I saw the look on Howard's face when I had said, You wished you didn't have that up and down walk. And even though he acted like he didn't care anymore, for me, those words still hovered in the air between us like a storm cloud. I tossed a pebble into the creek and watched the water ripple and the minnows scatter. I'm sorry for what I said, Howard. When he looked a little puzzled, I said, About you wishing you didn't have that up and down walk. Oh, he tossed a pebble into the creek too, and Wishbone leaped in after it, sending up a spray of cold water. I know that was a mean thing to say, and I'm sorry, I said. I wished for Howard to say, That's okay, but he didn't. I waited for him to say, Don't worry about it, but he didn't. I waited for him to say, Oh, heck, Charlie, I forgot about that, but he didn't. In fact, he didn't say anything for the longest time. Then he shrugged and said, I'm used to kids saying mean things about the way I walk. Ouch. Stab me in the heart, Howard. Toss me into the mean pile with all the other hateful kids in Colby. Squish me into the mud like the worm that I am. My eyes darted from tree to rock to creek to fern while I scrambled to figure out what to say next. Then I spied it, a blackbird feather nestled in the leaves and the pine needles beside the creek. Look, I said, grabbing the feather and holding it up for Howard to see. He squinted at me, pushing his glasses further up his freckled nose. Something to wish on, I said. You stick it in the ground and make a wish. I held it out for him. Here, you take it, make a wish. Shook his head. Nah, why not? He took his glasses off and wiped drops of creek water off of them with the edge of his shirt. Then he put them back on and said, 'Cause I know my wish ain't never coming true. Well, now, that surprised me, coming from Howard, who was always Mr. Positive. How do you know that? I asked. I just do. But look at me, I said. I've made the same wish every day since fourth grade, and it hasn't come true yet. I stroked the top of Wishbone's wet head. But if I made that wish enough times, I know it will someday. Then I hope it does, Howard said. I held the feather out to him again. You sure? He nodded. So I stuck the feather into the soft dirt behind the creek, closed my eyes, and made my wish. On the way home that day, the feeling that had been weighing me down so much since I said that mean thing to Howard felt like a bit lighter. I wasn't sure if I had fixed my mistake, but at last I had tried. Excuse the sounds in the background. Now you can meet Lily, Mama, and you could see in the background again Lexi.